Well, good afternoon. I'd like to welcome you to our quarterly lecture series. Friends of the California Condors Wild and Free is a nonprofit. We are all volunteer. All our donations go directly to a Condor project. Our current program project is Clean Food for California Condors. And we are so happy today to have as our guest lecturer Dr. Myra Finkelstein. She is an adjunct professor in the Microbiology and Environmental Toxicology department at the University of California, Santa Cruz. As an environmental toxicologist with almost 25 years of experience, she's been working on issues related to contaminant-induced effects in wildlife, as well as a proven track record for generating solid scientific evidence that has resulted in a tangible benefit to wildlife health. For example, Dr. Finkelstein's research showed unequivocally that Laysan albatross chicks were severely lead poisoned from ingesting lead-based paint, and that this lead poisoning was contributing to population declines, prompting the remediation of lead-based paint on Midway Atoll. Additionally, Dr. Finkelstein and her colleagues identified lead-based ammunition as the principal source of lead poisoning in California condors, and lead poisoning as the primary impediment to condor recovery. And this information was critical and instrumental in the passage of AB 711 in California, which is the banning of lead ammunition for taking animals. Thank you, Myra, for coming today.
Okay, thanks. Should I turn the lights off so you can see
Yeah,
Tim's? Most of the photographs are Tim Huntington, and he's amazing. So, okay, perfect. All right, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here today. It's been about 10 years since I've given a talk to the Friends group, and I am honored that they invited me again. So first I want to start that the work I'm going to talk about today is a highly collaborative effort, and there's a couple of people in this room that you'll see here on this list. I do not work alone. I do not work without the support of the Condor Recovery Team program and all the staff, plus other people. I'm also highlighting Dr. Vicki Bacher, who is a quantitative ecologist and has done a lot of the modeling work that I'll show you today. So outlined today is a little bit of background on condors and lead. Research leading up to the passage of AB 711, which is the statewide ban on lead-based ammunition in California for hunting, models to inform management, and then lead exposure post AB 711. It's complicated. And then lead poisoning, it's not just condors. So we're going to start with lead. So I love this quote, so I'm just going to read it to you. If we were to judge of the interest excited by any medical subject by the number of writings to which it has given birth, we could not but regard the poisoning by lead as the most important to be known of all those that have been treated of up to the present time. And this is Orfila, which is thought to be known as the father of toxicology. And he said this in 1817, over 200 years ago. So like the big thing to get from that is that we have known lead can poison you for a very long time. We know lead is highly toxic to multiple physiological systems, neurologic, reproductive, immune, and across vertebrate species, condors, humans. I'll talk about Kia today at the end. We also know that preventing exposure is really the only treatment for lead poisoning. Really, you need to prevent. So the other kind of star of the show today are California condors. I'm sure most of you in the room know this, but for maybe the one of you that doesn't, California condors are North America's largest terrestrial bird, wingspan of about 9 feet. They weigh about 20 pounds. They should be able to live up to 70 years, although they are dying at too high a rate right now in the wild, so we don't get them at that age. They start breeding about 6 years, and they have low reproduction, considered low. They have one chick about every other year, or yeah, every 2 years. So condor declined since the 1800s. So in the 1800s, the condor range was here on the western United States in the gray area, and there was estimated to be about 600 birds. And then when you get down to 1980s, the population dropped dramatically to only about a couple of dozen condors, and they're just sort of using this sort of U shape here in Southern California. So it's not surprising then that you would agree with me that California condors are considered one of the world's rarest birds. They've been under federal protection in the United States since the 1970s. They're actually one of the first species to be listed on the Endangered Species Act. They are listed as critically endangered by the IUCN, which is International Union of Conservation of Nature, since 1994. Because the condor populations were declining so dramatically in the 1980s, they started a breeding program. Here is a puppet rearing a captive chick, and it's adorable. I bet you guys all think that because you're condor people. In 1987, the controversial decision was made to bring all remaining free-flying condors into captivity. I say controversial because I actually remember when that was happening and people were talking about it. I was, I'm going to age myself here, but I was an undergrad at the time. They made that decision because the condors were dying at too high a rate in the wild, and they really wanted to keep that genetic information to use in the captive breeding program. They weren't staying alive in the wild. In 1992, the first releases of these captive reared birds were back into the wild. Condors are social and curious. Some of you might have seen this picture. I don't know, have some of you guys seen this picture before? Anyway, I've been told I love this picture, and I use it because I think it's adorable. This is a juvenile condor. This is supposedly taken at the Tehachapi Mountains. And the story goes that right after this picture was taken, the dog here went out and got its rubber ducky and brought it back to show the condor and maybe play with it. I thought that's so cute. But they do really well. They're social, curious, and they do really well in captivity and also for captive breeding. And so the condor population has increased dramatically since those lows in the 1980s. So I have numbers from December 31st, 2024. I don't have the 2025 numbers yet, but it's probably pretty similar. California, we had 214 free-flying condors, Baja, Mexico, 48, Arizona, 89, and then Northern California, which I don't have here on this map, 18. I'm going to talk to you primarily, most of the work we have been doing has been on the California population, Pinnacles National Park, Ventana Wilderness, those release sites, plus Bitter Creek. So kind of the 214 birds here. So over time, the number of birds of condors in the wild has increased dramatically due because this captive breeding program has been so effective. So this is number of years, and this is over time, and you can see like this is going up. And in fact, when I started working on condors in like 2008, 2009, California condor recovery was touted as the main conservation success. You know, such a great deal, because we did bring them back from extinction, which is amazing. But if you look at the numbers more closely, it actually paints a different picture. So this increase is driven primarily by captive reared releases. This is the number that have been dead or removed, and this is the number of wild fledges. So there's more here than here. So that means the condor population is not sustainable in the wild. And so we need those captive bred releases to keep that population growing. And I will keep kind of coming back to that today throughout kind of the time. So what could be going on? Well, condors are monitored on a near daily basis. They have tags, they have radio transmitters, a lot of them also have satellite tags, and their blood lead is monitored maybe about twice per year during routine health checks. If they're exhibiting odd behavior, they're not moving for a while, or something seems strange, the condor biologists go and trap them up to see what could be wrong, and they will also check their blood lead levels. And because of this, we have a lot of data on blood lead of the California condors since they started to be released in the 1990s. And if you look at that data over time, so we started this in 1997, and this is percent lead poisoned, and the metric here is just basically at the time when we published these data, that was kind of like the threshold that would trigger a clinical intervention, so maybe 40, 45 microgram per deciliter. And the point is a lot of them hit that threshold for needing clinical intervention. About 20%, kind of on an annual basis, would have a blood lead high enough that would trigger clinical intervention. which is a huge amount. It's lead poisoning of epidemic proportions. And then because the birds get treated in the zoo and then re-released, and then lead poisoned again, and then treated and then released, like the majority of condors flying out there have had blood lead levels that are high enough that you and I, it would be a huge concern, and maybe we would need medical intervention. So it's a huge problem. And not only that, condor lead-related mortality is the #1 mortality factor for these birds. So for free-flying juveniles and adults, lead is the #1 mortality factor. Aren't Tim's pictures beautiful, by the way? I'm so grateful he lets me use them. So what could be the source of lead? So lead isotope ratios can help identify the source of lead exposure. And that's because lead exists as 4 stable isotopes, lead 204, 206, 207, and 208. And the lead signatures in an organism reflect the lead signature in a source. And I've been using this sort of technique to look at lead poisoning in wildlife for many years now, but I also worked under my advisor, who I'm going to highlight in a minute, and he has done a lot of this work for kids. So this actually sort of method had been developed to understand the lead exposure sources to children. So a child would come in to the doctor with a high blood lead level, and a team would go out to that child's home and take dust from the dad's clothes or the mom's clothes, dirt from the front yard, paint from the windowsill, and do isotopic analysis to determine what was the source of lead to those kids. So we sort of adapted that kind of like method to use for wildlife. But it's the same kind of process. The thing that it needs, though, is you need to work in a clean lab. So I wear these cute little booties and jackets. It's a clean lab that's got like HEPA filter air, because you can't have any types of contamination that could mess up your isotopic signature. So you need to work in trace metal clean techniques with these highly sensitive measurements. So Don Smith is who I trained with to do the isotopic analysis, and I'm going to call out him here because he worked on some lead poisoning case in 2007 of Condor 306. Condor 306 was observed or suspected to feed on a pig shot with lead-based ammunition. It's good, my words are going out. Pig shot with lead-based ammunition. So here's the lead ratio on the y-axis, and here's the blood lead level. And this is for Condor 306. So Condor 306, like the majority of condors that were free-flying around in 2007, were captive bred and released. And so we actually had a blood sample from Condor 307 before that bird went into the wild. We call that a pre-release blood sample. So Condor 306, sorry. 307 was also part of this tool, but Condor 306's blood sample, pre-release, had isotopic signature here, and very low lead, which is what you would expect, right? It hadn't been released. So after 306 was suspected to feed on the pig, took the blood again, and the bird was lead poisoned. And it went down here. The isotopic signature shifted, and the blood lead went above like 140, so 150 microgram per deciliter. And just to give you a sense, like right around here, 40, 45, was the kind of threshold for clinical intervention at the time. And above 100, even though condors live with very high blood lead levels, above 100 is considered potentially lethal in many other vertebrate species. So this is a high exposure. So they went in and got the pig and then took the bullet from the pig and found that the bullet from the pig had the exact same isotopic signature of Condor 306's blood. So this is some of the first isotopic evidence that was used to show that these condors were lead poisoned from ingesting on lead-based ammunition. So this was really helpful information for the passage of the 2008 Ridley Tree Condor Preservation Act, and that was the ban on, in condor range for the take of big game and coyotes with lead ammunition. So that was a victory, right? Not supposed to be taking big game or coyotes with lead in the condor range. So we think, okay, well, we should probably see that things are better now for condors. But But condors continued to die of lead poisoning, and then the source of this lead was still being disputed. There are people that did not want to believe that condors could be lead poisoned from ingesting spent lead ammunition. This is a condor that is being treated for lead poisoning at the zoo, and this is a lead poisoned condor. We do know condors ingest spent lead ammunition. This is Condor 401. It had ingested a lead buckshot, and this is how you can see it there on the radiograph. And so over the years, we've been able to receive these lead items. Sometimes they look just like a bullet or buckshot. Sometimes it's a fragment from a lead-poisoned condor. And then we can look at that item, and we can also look at the blood, sort of like what Dawn did for Condor 306. So this is Condor 401. This is its lead item, the buckshot, and the blood. And you can see that the isotopic signature is not measurably different, illustrating that the lead item is a plausible, probable source of exposure to the bird. So we did this across multiple birds, and even though the lead item signatures could be different from the other birds, because they're not all the same lead items, they are not measurably different from the blood every single time. But we don't always get lead fragments from all these lead-poisoned condors, right? 20% are lead poisoned on an annual basis. So we did a larger study to try to understand what's happening kind of for those birds that we don't get the lead fragment from. So again, y-axis, and then log blood lead here. So these are a bunch of pre-release birds. So this is, again, before they're released, and so we know what their signature was before they were hopefully ever exposed to lead-based ammunition. We also got ammunition samples donated from our hunter exchange program, as well as some were purchased at a sporting goods store. And so the background looked here, ammo here. And then we looked at the isotopic signature and blood lead concentrations of about 110 wild free-flying condors that ranged from sort of lower exposure, lower than 10, to much higher exposures. And you can see that basically birds that are lower look more like background, and as they get bigger, higher, they tend to look more like ammunition. So we did quantitative modeling to sort of look at this, and basically determined that lead in about 80% of these birds are best explained by the signature of lead-based ammunition. So that's accounting for the majority of the poisoning of the birds. Yes?
Mess up the data if they have like 2 forms of lead in them. Let's say they got 2 small bullet fragments that were different, like one week, and then the next week they got another one. Would that mess up also where your lead signature ends up? Or?
Yes, so if they have to, actually, you know what? I can show you something at the very end where we have a mixture of 2 different sources, but it would be a mixture of the sources. Yeah. So, and sometimes when we dissect castings for birds that were lead poisoned, we'll get 2 different signatures of lead. So we'll pull them both, run them both, and see which one matches. And usually one has more lead than the other, and so one will kind of have a little bit more influence on the blood if it's poisoned at the exact same time. But yes, it does change stuff. You might be thinking, what's going on up here? What's happening there, right? So these birds are from Pinnacles National Park, and they were hanging out on an old fire watchtower and being curious and what I should say, naughty condors that they were, and they were eating the lead-based paint off of the old fire watchtower. So they were observed doing this, so we received pieces of the paint from the Pinnacles crew and ran it, and sure enough, the paint from that watchtower matched those birds. So it was great because of this, I remember actually when I was running the samples, so I'm on the instrument and I'm running the samples and they come up and I'm like, oh my God, and I call Alicia right then, and I say, it's the paint is poisoning those birds. And then we got, more data, but we finalized the data. But I told her right away because I was very excited because they moved very quickly to remediate the lead-based paint from that fire watchtower. So it was nice because they were able to remediate this source, so this was no longer a source for the condors. So by the time we published this work, this was no longer a source for the condors. So that was nice. Okay, so source is lead-based ammunition. We know it's bad, it poisons a lot of birds, but what does that mean in terms of like condor population health? So one of the other things we did is we looked at population viability analysis, and these are mathematical models that you do to predict the future status of a population. So we did this to sort of understand what's the effect of lead poisoning on population recovery. And we looked at basically the annual survivorship of individuals and the number of fledged young per female. And I'll just step back really quick right here because I work on other species. I've done a lot of work on albatross, I'm working on eagles, things like that. And we sample the population, right? But for condors, we actually know the fate of basically every individual. So you don't sample them. It's such a different way to like do work, you know? Because we knew basically out of all these birds, which ones lived and which ones died. So, and who reproduced. So it's a much more powerful data set. When I talk about some of this stuff later on, you'll appreciate why that's so important. So anyway, we looked at the actual condor performance over the past 20 years. And we also looked at 3 scenarios, and for this, we basically considered it a closed population, so no future releases, just to simplify things. We said in the first scenario, we're just going to keep everything the status quo. If a bird has high lead or it's injured or something like that, managers will go in, biologists will go in and do intervention and try to save the bird. Let's just then say we don't do that and birds start, we in our models say a bird will die if it hits a certain level of lead. You know, we predict that based on past observed blood lead levels. Or we say, what if we get rid of lead deaths? What's the population going to do? So because I'm going to show you different graphs throughout the talk with these PVA models, I want to just first walk what it does. So these graphs look like you have number of individuals on the y-axis, and then you're predicting years into the future. So you start at some population size, and then there's a growth rate, and you're predicting what's happening in like 15 years, 20 years, 50 years. So with this line here, the growth rate's 1, and basically you have the same number at 20 years than you did at 0 years. So the population's stable. Which, you know, is good if the number's high enough, right? If you have enough birds, stable's good. This is better, right? You have a growing population. If it's above 1, so it's above that line of 1, like this is all good. Your growth rate's above 1, you're growing. And then this is bad. Your population is below the 1 and you're declining. So this is kind of how you can sort of think about when you're predicting population or any numbers into the future. So for the lead-related mortalities, we found using this kind of looking at predicting the future that the lead-related mortalities are preventing condor recovery. So this is now the number of free-flying birds in California. When we did this, there were about 84, I think. So status quo lead management, the population is just about stable, so it was just hanging on. We're not releasing birds, so that's not growing. Now we're saying, okay, if the birds hit a blood lead of, let's say, you know, over 100, 200 microgram per deciliter, it dies. Which condors we know can now fly around with high levels, but this is the model, they die. And then you see the condor population quickly plummets again to extinction within like 20 years. But the thing that was cool about this was then we can say, okay, what if we get rid of the lead deaths? And we're like, oh my gosh, condors can be sustainable. Like they can be sustainable. Today, in the current like world, we just need to reduce lead poisoning. Like they have enough food, they have enough habitat, we just need to reduce lead. So this was important. We published this work, and we got the cover shot, which was kind of nice. This is basically the main things where condor lead poisoning was preventing recovery, and lead ammunition was a principal source of lead to condors. So now this work, plus we wrote a consensus statement on the health risks from lead-based ammunition in the environment, which we had 30 experts on health effects of lead. And we talked to a lot of people. We talked to NGOs and government, legislator, policymakers about our findings with condors and about how lead is bad, and we've known lead is bad for 200 years, and there's no safe level of lead exposure for young children without long-term neurological impairment. So we talked about all that. And in October 2013, Governor Jerry Brown signed AB 711, which is the first law. California is still the only state in the nation to require non-lead ammunition for hunting and depredation. Super huge win, right? We're very excited. Now we're like, okay, condors are going to be all right, right? So what's next for condor conservation? So we're just waiting. You know, AB 711 has a long phase-in period, got phased in 2019, but we're just like, okay, we feel good about this. Like, we're going to see progress. So we started working and collaborating with government and non-government partners to help use our models to help inform management decisions while we're sort of waiting for the non-lead regulations to help recover the condors. And Steve, right here, who's right there, was part of this effort, and Vicki, Dan Doak, and we were all basically working on condors. I had to call out Steve because I knew he was going to be here. So what this looks like is what we care most about is species recovery, right? So we have policy and management actions to help population health for species recovery. But we also have threats to reproduction and survival impacting health. So that could be like lead, right? And then we have monitoring data. So basically population status, survival rates, reproductive rates. We also have then these PVA models, like I showed you, to predict the future status of a population. But those PVA models is more of a linear thing. So what we did was working with the policy and management, we'll say the management people, to try to create a population viability management model. So it's iterative. So it's not just like you go through because things are changing all the time. So we're constantly sort of working with managers and trying to say this worked, this didn't work, and kind of coming through in this sort of more of a circular, not linear path. Again, the goal is species recovery. So we built these second generation population models. We, as in really the quantitative ecologist, Vicki, did the majority of the model coding. And she compiled daily data on all condors free flying in California. Probability of first breeding, rebreeding, hatching, fledging. Again, we have so much data on these birds. It's crazy. Drivers of survival and reproduction. What's their age? What's their sex? What's their flock? Are they Southern California? Are they Central California? Now we can start putting in Northern California. What's the temporal trends? Has it been raining a lot in that year? What's their behavior? I'll touch more on that later. What's their release status? Have they just been released? Are they captive bred? You know, were they wild hatched? What's their blood lead? And has there been any other management actions? So literally millions of records. Just crazy. And this allows us greater flexibility to use simulations and explore these management questions. So unfortunately, with this work, we found that the condor population growth still remains reliant on captive bred releases. So this is total population. Again, we're predicting into the future. Here's actual numbers, and now the model's starting to predict. So this is with captive bred releases. It's still driving the growth. And without, we're actually now below 1. And so just for things, so this is like a stable population, but we're actually predicted to be below 1. So that's not good, right? So we need these captive bred releases. So with that in mind and saying it's still critical for condor population growth, how do we maximize those resources? So can we use our models to help understand that a little bit better? So early in the program, they started swapping out failed eggs for zoo-laid eggs. And this happened a lot where I'm from, up in Central California. primarily because of DDE exposure for those condors feeding on marine mammals. So we did this work with this probability of an egg hatching, and then the DDE exposure in the female. The higher DDE exposure, the lower probability that egg will hatch due to eggshell thinning. And so they would go in there, climb into the nest, take out the egg, bring it back to the zoo, incubate it. Well, they'd replace it with a dummy egg. And then, I mean, some of the condor biologists could give you more details for sure, but then they have to climb back in the nest when the egg is about to hatch or just hatched. They tape it back into the egg, like they stick the chick back in there, and then they put it back in the nest. So that is a lot of work, right? A lot of resources. So should we prioritize doing that, going into the nest, taking those failed eggs, putting a dummy egg, raising a captive, a captive laid zoo egg, then replacing it right when it's about to hatch? Or should we focus on these captive bred releases, which we know is really important? So our models were able to quantify the difference benefits. And we showed that these juvenile releases increases population growth more than basically replacing eggs in the nest. So these are as eggs replaced, juveniles released. So this is basically a growth rate of around 1, this kind of contour line. And so for this, you have to have 10 eggs replaced. And on the other side, you only need 5 juveniles. So basically, one captive bred juvenile release has about 2 times the effect of a zoo-laid egg being put in. So if you're trying to increase your bang for your buck, it's better to focus on the captive bred releases than replacing those eggs and climbing into the nest twice and all that other stuff. And this has nothing to do with cost or logistical effort. It's purely benefit to population growth. And so from this, we help to inform management actions to where, shifting resources really to prioritize those captive bred juvenile releases, because that's really important. Lead poisoning, though, does remain the #1 mortality factor for adult condors. So can we use captive breeding? How do we do that to offset lead mortality? So I'm calling out Mike Clark here. So Mike Clark is the keeper at the LA Zoo, or a former keeper. And you might know him because, well, you might know of Mike Clark. But anyway, he's pioneered sort of captive breeding techniques to boost reproduction of California condors in captive facilities. And he is amazing. And I don't know, my mom said I should show you this video, and my undergrad said I should show you this video, and I love this video, and I don't know if you've seen it, but even if you have, I've seen it like 50 times. I'm going to show it to you again, and I hope the sound works. Let me see if I can do this. Mike made this video. I love it. So I don't know if Mike knows that I show his video to anyone that I can, even to my human anatomy students, by the way, because it just makes me laugh. But it's funny, and it's good for 2 reasons. So it's showing 2 pre-fledged condor chicks that they've developed these these techniques to where they can put them together. And I don't know if you remember, but condors only lay 1 egg. So the fact that you have these 2 pre-fledged juveniles, basically what they're doing is they're practicing flying, right? I thought we're saying dancing. They're practicing flying, and they're doing it together, which you would never see in the wild. And it's one of the techniques that Mike really helped to pioneer that's really helped boost the captive breeding program, which is why we have so many condors now. We would never have this many. So anyway, I love it. Okay. But we did find, even though given that, and they're important, reducing lead mortality is more effective than releasing juveniles for overall population health. And it gets even more important with larger starting population sizes. So if the starting population size is 100, a 1% reduction in lead mortality is equal to 3 captive bred juvenile releases. So here, so this is like basically you're reducing by 1%, you're increasing the growth rate by about 1, and that's equivalent to 3 captive juvenile releases. So 1 adult, 3 juvenile releases. But if you have a higher starting population, it's even more. A 1% reduction in lead mortality is equal to about 7 juvenile releases if your starting population size is 300. And that's just kind of a compounding interest thing, because those reduction in mortality is saving that bird year after year after year after year, so it's able to produce again and again and again, and it's just a one-time captive bred juvenile release. So with a higher population, it's even more effective. Since 2020, not only was it a bad year for us, it was also a bad year for condors. In 2020, 12 condors in California, about 10% of the central flock, was killed from a wildfire, died in a wildfire. In 2023, highly pathogenic avian influenza was confirmed or suspected of killing 21 condors in the Arizona-Utah flock, which was about 20% of their population. So here, for those of you that might not know it, I'm just giving a plug to California Condor Wild and Free Clean Food Program to help protect condors here in Southern California from avian influenza and lead, that's a supplemental benefit, to keep condors alive. So if you're interested in learning more about that program, please go to the Friends of California Condor Wild and Free website. So we found that condors cannot withstand frequent catastrophic events. So this is without ongoing releases, total population size, this is stable, this is now what I've shown for current conditions, and you have a catastrophic event at 8 years, 4 years, or 2 years. And the problem is the population size just isn't large enough right now to withstand these events. But what this means for our work with Fish and Wildlife Service is that we now are using and basically incorporating catastrophic events into our simulations to more realistically predict what will happen to condors in the future. It's not like we're thinking it's going to happen, but we're running simulations in case that they do to sort of say, if we have these catastrophic events, this is what the size might be. So we got this work published a little bit over a year ago. The highlights are that condor population growth is still reliant on captive bred releases due to lead-related mortality. Releasing captive bred juveniles results in higher population growth than nest management, so replacing those eggs with zoo-laid eggs. Small reductions in lead-related mortality results in higher population growth than juvenile releases. And the current condor populations, we can't have frequent catastrophic events. So I just want to zero in on condor population growth still reliant on captive bred releases due to lead-related mortality. So why, right? We published that in 2024. And the phase-in was completed in 2019. So what's going on? The elephant in the room. So this is percent lead poison. It's just, looking at it. One of the things over time, condor blood lead levels are increasing. The number of birds and the level of blood lead is going up. Their lead mortality is also increasing. So why? So this is something that we're currently working on. In fact, we've got some work that's basically almost published that will talk about it, and I'm going to talk a little bit about some of it right now, but more of it is hopefully going to be out very, very soon. So could it be condor behavior shifts, shooting behavior shifts, groundswell population increases? What is going on? I'm going to focus today on talking about condor behavior shifts. So this is Condor 422. Well, I think it's a shot of 422. Imagine it being 422. It's like what I think of 422. So 422 was released in Pinnacles in January 2009. And Daniel George, who was the program manager there at the time, told me that this bird was different than the other juvenile releases. 422, she didn't want anything to do with the proffered food that was being provided her. When they released her, she was gone. She took off over that mountain and she was gone. She didn't come back. She didn't sample the free buffet. She was out of there. She's like, I am a wild condor now. And she was dead within 6 months of lead poisoning. So one of the things we've been working on and focused on is what about this behavior? Like we have two measures of condor behavior. One is time spent near the management area, so they're hanging out there, hanging out with their friends. We assume the management area has higher sort of like information about the use of lead. Maybe they don't use lead as much in the park, things like that. Also, we look at time they're actually spent eating the proffered food that's provided them. And we know that condors observed at these proffered feeding stations are less likely to be lead poisoned and more likely to survive. So this is probability of lead poisoning. Basically, it goes down with more days observed at the feeding stations, and same with increasing survival, the more days observed at the feeding stations. But these condors are wild, right? Like, they shouldn't be hanging around the feeding stations. They should be flying very long distances. So this is the proportion of days observed at feeding stations and just like per number of individuals in the flock. And you could see that basically the more birds in the flock, the less likely they are to hang around at the feeding stations, which is a good thing, right? We want them to be out there. But it's also a bad thing, kind of like for 422. So I like to give this analogy about COVID. So it's 2020, and COVID rates are super high in your town. And let's say you're very worried about COVID exposure. You're one of the people that doesn't leave their house, that has all the food delivered, goes into the garage, you wipe it down with ethanol before it comes into your house. You're one of those people, which is good. I mean, like, no judgment. But that's who you are. So your risk of getting exposed to COVID, even though it's super high outside your doorway, is very, very low, because you're not outside your doorway. But then it's 2021, and you've had it. You go to restaurants, you go to bars, you go to concerts. Now the level of COVID in your neighborhood, let's say it's dropped by half. Your personal exposure risk is way higher because you're no longer just sitting in your kitchen. And that's what's happening with condors. So our models show that condors with less time spent near a management area have a higher lead poisoning risk. And this is just this pattern we've seen over and over and over again. It shows up in all of our models. The more they're just going out there and being condors, the more they're getting into trouble and finding something. And it just takes one hit of a poison carcass to kill them. So it's not necessarily meaning that there's more lead on the landscape. So it's not like, for my analogy, rates were higher when you decided to go to bars and then you were exposed. It's just that now you're going to bars. Now the condors are out there. So even if rates are lower, their risk of exposure is higher. And overall, we've found that shifting behaviors are counteracting conservation actions, creating a situation we call the Red Queen conservation. So it's not stable. And so basically, the Red Queen's race is from Lewis and Carroll's Through the Looking Glass, where the queen says, now you see it. It takes all the running you can do to keep in the same place. So that's what's happening, we think, with condors. There's all this stuff happening, but they're just in the same place. Lead poisoning is the same, or it's worse, even though all of these things are happening. So it's these shifting baselines. Condors are not doing the same things now they were doing 20 years ago. So that's why it's complicated. Because if you just look at the data without thinking about what their behavior is, it looks like lead is worse. Condor lead poison rates have increased. Lead mortality has increased. But especially for condors in Southern California, lead poisoning rates increase is due to these shifting behaviors. And we have evidence that the ban has actually been effective. So That's why it's complicated. But lead poisoning from ingestion of lead-based ammunition is not just condors. I work on bald eagles and golden eagles as well. And I also did some work a couple of years ago on New Zealand kea, which I'm going to just give you a brief snippet of right now, mostly because I talk about some of you guys with condors all the time. But have you heard my kea work before? See, there you go. Kea are large mountain parrots endemic to New Zealand. They have a wingspan of 3 feet. They live about 30 years, start breeding at 3. Clutch size is about 3 eggs per clutch. And they're listed as endangered by the International Union of Conservation of Nature. They're actually also considered kind of maybe sometimes critically endangered. They're not doing well. So the problem was, when I was approached, was that kea are documented to be lead poisoned. But kea, these are very inquisitive parrots, and they're very much getting into trouble. And they spend a lot of time on these old huts that were very old historic huts in New Zealand, and they like to pull off the lead-based flashing on these huts and tear the huts apart in other ways. So the current hypothesis was, yes, of course they're lead poisoned, but you see them on these huts and they're eating the flashing or pulling them off and playing with it, and that's why they're lead poisoned. And so there's work being done to remediate the huts in New Zealand to prevent this as an exposure source. But there's also concern that kea are exposed to lead through ingestion of lead-based ammunition because they scavenge, which is I have a picture of one later of a kea scavenging on a carcass, because you wouldn't think of it, but they scavenge. And lead-based ammunition is used in hunting and culling operations throughout New Zealand by government depredation teams. So I was approached to basically use lead-based isotopic compositions of blood, ammunition, and building materials to help identify what were the sources of lead to the kea. So these are 2 lead sources. On the y-axis is that lead signature. This is ammo. This is basically building materials. So the building materials were up here, flashing and nail heads. And then this is the ammunition that we got from the New Zealand Department of Conservation and other hunters in the area of New Zealand, and that's what it looked like. So lead-based building materials, very different than lead-based ammunition, which was important to be able to determine was it poison from one or the other. So here's the ratio, blood lead. So blue is ammunition. Gray is that mixture, could be a mixture of the 2. And then green is the building materials. So out of these exposed birds, about 40%, their lead source is best explained by ammunition, 40% building materials, and 20% seems like a mixture. We also did population models to sort of show what does it mean for these kea. They are endangered. Their current, here's population size, year into the future. This is why I gave you that graph at the beginning. We have lots of these graphs in the talk. This is current conditions, estimated to be, so that population is declining. But in the models, you can say, okay, what if we remove some of the lead-related mortality? So if you eliminate 3% of lead-related mortality, which is a reasonable amount to remove, you can switch the population of kea to be self-sustaining. So that was an important kind of point to put in the paper, where's the goal? Where are we trying to get to? So this work was important. Here's the kea scavenging on a tar. Lead isotopic compositions indicate lead-based building materials and lead-based ammunition are responsible for the majority of lead exposure in the kea. So they both are. It's not one or the other. They're both important sources. But when I started this work, they were really only worried about the lead huts, and they just didn't they weren't thinking about the ammunition being a problem. So this was important also because this publication is now being used to help advocate for the switch to non-lead ammunition in New Zealand. Especially, we have Department of Conservation people who were co-authors and working on the paper to go through and say we shouldn't do culling operations with lead-based ammunition because we're poisoning our endangered kea. And we have a paper to prove it, which was important. It also won this Management Society award probably because of the management implications for it. Okay, you guys are almost done. So although we have made progress with recovery of condors, their populations are still not sustainable. And that lead-based ammunition continues to be a threat towards the recovery of condors, but also other species around the globe. It's not just condors. And with that, I want to thank, especially Fish and Wildlife Service, those of you, especially in the room, that are with Fish and Wildlife Service, National Park Service, and different people, other people, take questions. Thank you.
I'm curious if there's a difference in the lead signature with different ammo types. Can you talk about that?
So basically all the lead right now that's used is recycled lead. So you definitely get these differences in ammo signatures depending on if it's like ammo from a lot in 2026 versus 2010. So you get that kind of difference. We are looking right now to see if we see a difference in like air rifle signatures, because, for example, the air rifles are not covered under the AB 711 legislative ban. So, I mean, there might be something that looks a little bit different with air rifles. We haven't seen, in terms of like ammo that's bought in the same kind of time zone, huge differences between different types. But there might be something different with air rifle. But I was talking to the non-lead outreach people, and they think that's very, what's the word? Unsurprising, because air rifle ammo is a different, like they use a different type, like that lead is like a different kind of lead, or it's coming from a different source. So it's to make those air rifle pellets. Does that answer your question, sort of? Yeah.
You had a statement that the legislative ban on lead ammunition was effective. How it is effective, and why? But why? How is it effective? How do you see that is it effective, since we still have so much lead in the environment? And why is it not effective? And is anything being done to close that gap?
So yeah. So our work that's currently in the final stages, hopefully, of publication, goes into that in more detail. But it comes back to the COVID analogy. Like, even though we think the rates, or like the amount of lead on the landscape has gone down, and we can see evidence that is correlating to those times of the bans, because the condors are doing other things and there's other things happening, they are personally getting exposed still now at higher rates than they were. Because condors today
are not following the ban, is what you're saying.
Well, it doesn't take very many people. So only, a handful of carcasses with lead can poison a lot of condors. So we're talking like not a lot. So we do feel like, by and large, like hunters' deer tags, like they've been very compliant, and that is important to providing a good, lead-free source of food for the birds. But it doesn't take a lot of lead out there to poison a lot of condors, and I think that is the big problem that we're running up against. Condors are doing a little bit of different things, going into one other patch. And then I don't think we have any non-lead outreach people here in the audience, but they could talk about like the difficulty finding non-lead, like for ground squirrels and things like that. Like that's been another big barrier. So, so I do.
Also, a lot of like the taking of pigs and ground squirrels and other animals other than deer take place primarily on private land, and a lot of deer hunting takes place on public land. And it's just, again, it's complicated. There's little to no reporting on small game or varmints like ground squirrels that we know condors feed on.
Yeah.
Carl Coford knew they fed on ground squirrels all the way back then. And then we also know that pig hunting is underreported. So the depredation numbers are lower the state who manages those programs recognizes that. So yeah, it's again, so hopefully a lot of the work that Myra's been working on will help us focus those outreach efforts on those things that we can't demonstrate are working. Like, let's not put all our outreach efforts toward deer hunting necessarily. There's crossover for sure,
Yeah.
but knowing that pigs and other animals other than deer are likely a bigger problem helps us focus those limited resources on where to outreach. And the state's very interested in that too, because the state all along, who manages the hunting programs, felt that they had high compliance with deer hunting. So they weren't initially very receptive to what we were saying, but they're very receptive to the fact that we can say that we think pigs have a lot to do with it. They were basically like, oh, pigs are underreported. We think a lot of people take pigs. So it's
Yeah.
baby steps.
It's just an enforcement issue, a compliance issue, and an education one.
Yeah. And you can still, purchase. It's not like it's not available. I mean, it's still available. It's just, so that there is also, like you said, education. I think there's also a lack of awareness. People don't really know what they shouldn't be doing on their own private land. I don't think I don't believe there's any, malicious intent or anything. It's just sort of this lack of awareness and understanding, and also access. I mean, COVID also was terrible for supply chain things and people getting hold of non-lead ammo.
Yeah, in the sense of the hunters, I think the law is not perfect, and I speed, I'll admit it, I break the law. And so, yeah, Steve talks on the phone when he's driving. Oh, you're gonna call on me, okay, turn me in. So I think that also, the way the law is written, you can still sell the ammunition because you can use it for target practice, and you can use it to predate, correct? So it's
called livestock.
Livestock
so
only.
It's just hunting, so that's why,
Well, and air rifles aren't covered. And now air rifles, you can use them to hunt pigs, apparently, or kill pigs. They're powerful enough. So that's also evolved. So there's the problem with that.
different question.
Yeah.
So we talk about that other scavengers get lead poisoning. Is it a crisis with condors because their biology is different, or is it more of a crisis with condors because we're starting with fewer numbers? Do we know? Like, are they metabolizing the lead differently because of their stomach acids, or?
We do not know that. I think it's probably a combination of their life history. They do not have that many offspring. They have a very, we call it low reproductive rate. They're very highly case-selected species, so they've evolved to have very high survival for adults. Like, once they reach juvenile adulthood, they've evolved to basically have a very, very high probability of surviving to the next year. And so if you just knock that down a couple percent, they're not going to do as well. So, and then they're obligate scavengers. When you think about golden eagles or bald eagles, they eat other things too. And then you think about turkey vultures, they have higher reproduction. So it's sort of like a combination, I think, of those things. We don't have any evidence that they are either more susceptible or less susceptible that I know of. I don't know they do have, yeah.
Other than the levels of lead that condors survive is so much higher than other species like eagles.
Yeah, but I'm doing some work on eagles now, and some of them have high levels. So I don't know how much of that is just sort of a data thing, but
Yeah,
it is
okay.
true. Condors fly around with levels of lead that we would be dead. We would be dead. I can't imagine. So yeah, I don't know. We are kind of interested, though, to see if there's some kind of a genetic basis for why they can have such high levels of lead right now. But anyway, it's another talk, another day, another something.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if sorry, if the lead poisoning is impacting like their reproduction rates, or like if they were healthier overall, would we have more wild fledges?
So one of my grad students did some work and showed that the lead was affecting condor stress response, which is known and shown in humans. So there are lots and lots of sublethal effects of lead. I mean, we can go into all the neurologic things, but the bottom line is they're not surviving enough, like these acute kind of lead exposure events, to even see what the sublethal effects are. So I think once we take care of the fact that they're, all sort of the high levels of them are dying, then we got to say, okay, we have this population that has, like, almost all had these levels of exposure that we know cause reproductive stress, whatever impairment in other species, neurologic. I don't know. We have to wait. Does it, I don't know. Does it make them different? I don't know.
You showed survivability, long-term population viability model results for varying levels of lead mortality. And then you also showed some having to do with shifting behavior, I believe, how much they range. But there wasn't a slide looking at modeling both those different effects sort of together. Is that what's coming in the coming paper? Have you done
Yes.
those runs? You've done
Yeah,
those?
we do have some of it in our 2016, I think it's the 2016 paper, where condors that spend more time away, so those behaviors, they have higher lead poisoning risk and lower survival. So that was incorporated in that 2016 model. We have more data in the newer paper coming in.
With the plots showing over the 20 or 30 years going out.
I think those exact plots are not in the new paper, but the whole, those models, those data are in the models. And all the models that Vicky's run and all the management models that she's done to help inform different things, that behavior part of it, it's significant in every single one. It's like a significant influence for survival in every single model. And that is because these guys tag those, and watch those birds, and we know every day where they are. So we have like daily data records on all the condors in California, which is kind of amazing. Yeah.
So what percent of the birds are tagged, the wild birds? What percent of them? I mean, because I know they lose transmitters and batteries go dead, and I know you trap them often, but sort of on the average, what's the sort of current percent of birds that are able to be monitored?
Yeah, we have about 85% of our population transmitted currently with radio transmitters, and then about half have GPS transmitters in addition to their radio transmitters. We're hoping for higher, of course, but that's where we're at now. Yeah.
And do you know about the other populations?
Similar.
So, yeah, it's similar.
Everyone's still really trying for 100%, really, because all the populations really have about 100 birds in the U.S. And so it's still really, really small.
Yeah, are bullet manufacturers looking to find alternative to lead bullets?
So from what the non-lead outreach folks tell us, the ammunition, the non-lead and even hunting component of what they manufacture is just a drop in the bucket. And so there's 2 manufacturers that were manufacturing 22 long rifle for varmints, and both of those companies stopped, I think 2 years ago maybe, and they haven't started up again. And so that's like a huge issue is related to the availability, and and something, I mean, if we had all the money that we wanted, we would be subsidizing the manufacturer of more non-lead ammo and making it cheaper for people. So it's a better deal for them when they go to the store. Because at the end of the day, that's probably what it will take.
Do we have any idea what percentage of the condor food is being hunted versus culled versus annoying rodents and coyotes and whatever?
So, question, I guess, is kind of thing about what, if we have any idea of percentage of what proportion of the condor food is hunted versus, like, you mean deer remains versus pig depredation versus ground squirrel? I guess the short answer is no. I mean, we kind of know for the proffered feeding how much proffered food is provided, so we can sort of think about what's proffered versus non-proffered. But in terms of non-proffered, we don't really know. We did get an idea about how much, like, we estimated proportions feeding on marine mammals, but they have that has a different, like, carbon and nitrogen signature that you can differentiate against, like, terrestrial. So that was how we could do that. We looked into squirrels, like, could we see a difference with squirrels and something else, but we haven't been able to pick up any identifying feature of squirrels. Although we were going to do a study on the, like, eDNA, but I don't think that went forward.
Any other questions for Myra? Thank you so much.
Welcome.
This has been really educational. Oh, and by the way, we actually have a puppet that she was showing in the presentation from the LA Zoo back on the table if you want to see one up close.
Great. Thanks, everybody. My email if you ever have questions.